Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to incorporating restorative circle practices into group work. Before we begin, I would like to go over a little housekeeping. If you require closed captioning, you can select the small white box with the two letter C's located on the toolbar, either at the bottom or top of your screen. You are welcome to rename yourselves for identification purposes by choosing the three small dots or ellipses located in the upper right corner of your personal box in Zoom, and then selecting rename. At the same time, you can also add your pronouns if you so choose. My name is Sherry Adams, your student wellness counselor here at CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. I am pleased to welcome you on behalf of Counseling and Wellness Services. Today's event is the fifth in our inaugural series of events for Health and Wellness Week. It gives me great pleasure to introduce today's facilitators, Spring Cooper and Emma Suey, Associate Professors of Community Health and Social Sciences here at CUNY SPH. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Spring and I are really excited to be part of this week of events. And just, I think, really delighted to have a chance to translate a really meaningful experience that we had this year of using restorative circles with a student group that we were working with. It's just been great to have a chance to reflect on that experience and to try to translate it into thinking about tools for other people to use. And I wanted to mention also that, as we wrote in the description, we really are newcomers to this world of work, but we see so much potential in it for work in student groups and, far, far beyond that as well. But just full disclosure, we're still learning as well, of course. Spring, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
No, yeah, I think that we are excited to share this, and we would love other kind of conspirators and trying more circles.
Yeah, and we'll have some opportunities in the chat. Feel free to use the chat throughout to chime in with additional ideas or additional approaches that might be complementary. So before we dive into telling you about what restorative circles are and our thinking about how we might use them in student group work, and sharing some of the exercises and practicing with them a little bit as well, we thought we'd get to know everyone a little bit better by doing an icebreaker. And our icebreaker to start out with is just, let's say our names and something that we like about springtime. And I'll start and then I'll pass it to someone, and we can just go around that way. So once you're done, choose another person and pass it to them. So my name is Emma, and even though Spring has been hearing about this a lot recently, I have really horrible seasonal allergies. I still just have such a deep love for flowering trees and the explosion of color that they bring to city streets. And I will pass it to Joanna.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Joanna, and I too love, hence my background photo, blooming, just anything, but yeah, particularly blooming trees. It's the best part. And the birds, the singing birds.
Ooh, and can you pass it to someone?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I pass it on to Stephanie. You're on mute.
Hi, I just stepped away for a moment, so.
Oh, no worries.
We're doing an icebreaker where we say our names and something that you like about springtime, and then you'll pass it. You can choose someone else to pass it to when you're done.
Got you. Stephanie Black. I am still doing my core courses. I'm focusing on the community health track, and in terms of what I like about spring, I love the transition of season, any season really, to be honest. I love the transition periods more than I would say the whole season itself. I love the possibilities and, of starting over with something new.
Great. And can you pass it?
And see, Juliana, or is it Juliana?
Yes, it's Juliana. Thank you so
Hello,
much,
Juliana.
Stephanie. Hi, everyone. My name is Juliana Campos. This is my second semester with CUNY PH. What I love about spring is it gets dark a lot later than usual. And there's something about leaving work at 5 o'clock and still seeing clouds and a blue sky and birds chirping. It's really nice. I'll pass it to JC because we have the same initials.
JC, are you there? Maybe Juliana, you want to choose someone else and we'll go back to JC.
Sure. How about Jess?
Hi, I'm Jess. I am a second year at CUNY in the community health track. And I feel like my favorite part about spring is just like I have more energy. I feel like I'm so tired all of winter. So it's nice to, I don't know, feel like everything is coming alive and just more energetic in general. So that's probably my favorite part. And I will pass it to Amina.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Amina and I'm a first year PhD student in the community health and health policy track. Besides the blooming flowers, it's the warmer temperature and the longer days. So having more opportunity to go outside for a walk. And I will pass it to, so we still have JC, I think.
And Sadaf. And
Yes.
Sadaf put in the chat that
Yeah.
they couldn't speak out loud, but Sadaf put one in the chat.
oh, I missed that.
I think Sierra and Sherry and I are still left.
Yeah, so spring, please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Spring. I use she or they pronouns. And my favorite part of springtime is how there are signs in every window saying, hello, spring, welcome, spring, or little bears or things sold at the store that say that. My name is just everywhere and I feel very special. Even though I know it's not for me, it still feels good. And I'll pass to Xiomara. Are you there, or Xiomara?
Yes, hi everyone. So my name is Xiomara, and my favorite thing about spring, I really enjoy the weather in spring. I think winter is just like, I can't really enjoy it because of the cold. I don't really like going out when it's too cold. But spring is just perfect. Spring and fall, they're both like great weathers, and also the flowers in the spring are my favorite.
And Sherry, if you're still with us, you want to join us in the icebreaker?
If you're there, you're on mute.
Did you say Sherry?
We were just asking if you wanted to join us in the icebreaker.
Okay, I missed Sherry. Please excuse me, everyone. I'm having some Wi-Fi issues. Yes, I'd love to. So my name is Sherry and I use she, her, hers pronouns. And what I like about spring is more sunlight. Makes me feel like I'm on the West Coast, but with all the great things about the East Coast, and just boosts my mood. I also like that I can get back to walking for a longer period of time and feel really comfortable walking.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. It's nice to start getting to know you a bit. Yes, Stephanie.
Can I say, I feel like I gave a very ambiguous answer. So I thought of something concrete that I really love. I know I was giving like some existential, like transition, you know,
I loved
answer.
it. But if you want to add something
I-
concrete, go ahead.
I try to think of something really like different. And I didn't want to give I wanted to give a completely different answer from everyone. So sometimes it takes me a little while. I'm really excited, especially post-COVID. A lot of bands are announcing tours right now. So there's a lot of bands that it's cold and they don't tour as much. And now like a whole bunch of bands are going back out on the road. It's really exciting.
Fun.
Go out and support musicians. They need it.
Agree. So I'm going to go ahead and share our slides. We're going to move through some description and background, and then, weave in some reflections, exercises, etc. So let me start by saying that our focus on how restorative circle practices can be used in student group work in particular really comes out of course, our experience of doing this year. That's the context that's most familiar to us in a way, but also because we know that group work is something that happens in so many of our courses at the school, particularly in the master's program. It's a major modality through which learning is happening, and also to some degree in the doctoral program. And the way we think about group work, I think as instructors, is that ideally working in groups provides an opportunity to amplify and enrich the learning that goes on in the course, as well as it can be a great source of support for group members. Sometimes groups continue beyond a particular course as a study group or as a social group. And so that's sort of how they work in the ideal. But what we have seen in our own experience, heard about from students, and seen in formal evaluations at times as well, is that, without attention and support and luck, that group work can also be really, really tough. And I imagine some of you here have experiences with that it can result in harm to group members, sometimes exacerbating existing inequities that exist in our courses, in our school, in society. And that as a result of that, we often see kind of reduced learning and really difficult experiences for group members. So in light of that, our goals for today's session are to provide a foundation for understanding the purpose and processes of restorative circles, to share some specific exercises that can be used in restorative circles that may strengthen student groups, and to suggest how restorative practices can be applied in the context of student groups. So I will turn it over to Spring for our next few slides on foundations. Oh, Spring.
Oh, yeah, I know. I'm on mute. So we want to take just a few minutes to give you a little bit of history about where restorative justice circles come from, and then kind of how they're traditionally used, and then broader uses that we can think of for them as well. So restorative justice circles are born out of Indigenous societies around the world. So you can think about this communal nature, this community where everybody is valued for their gifts. And we are keeping this vibe of keeping this reciprocity through everybody in the community, and building accountability between individuals in this way. Next slide. So restorative justice circles specifically are used when there is some type of disruption in a group. So you can imagine if a group was working together and there was a big argument, or there was a disagreement about the way things should be done, or there was some personal conflict that arose. So restorative justice circles are used in universities. They're used in mediation and moderation outside of the courtroom, instead of legal answers or other punishment type of instead of punishment, right? So if we think about restorative justice in comparison to criminal justice asks what law was broken, who broke it, what's the punishment that's deserved. And in contrast, restorative justice asks, how are you harmed? What do you need? And whose obligation is it to meet those needs? So a very different approach to when there's some type of disruption or disagreement among the individuals in a specific small group or community. So restorative justice circles start by having each person introduce themselves and the relationship within the circle. Responsible parties share what happened to them before, during, and after the incident, and then affected and impacted parties do the same. Supporting parties are also invited to share their thoughts and feelings about what they've heard. And then facilitators will help guide this whole process. And once everyone has spoken, the group brainstorms options for repairing the harm that has been done. So you can see how this could be used for something that is a criminal offense, or it could be used just among a small community of coworkers or students who is having a problem in the group. But there's a lot more broader uses that you can also use these circles for. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. So we came to the circles when there had been some conflict within the group. And then we saw not only how well it works there, but how many other uses these circles really have. And so this list I found online, but they talk about all of these different types of things that we can think about using the circles for. Building and strengthening relationships, healing these harms we've talked about, fostering connection, really integrating people that have been removed in some way from a community, addressing any concerns that's happening, approaching something that's challenging in the future, celebrating things. You can use them to plan and organize, and they're really good for redistributing power and dismantling systems of power and hierarchy, which is one of the things that we found so valuable in these circles. So we can see just from this brief description of like the background and, you know, where we're coming from here, that these circles can really be integrated into group work for quite a lot of great, hopefully, outcomes is our idea, is what we suspect.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself for a moment. Yeah, and from this slide, two things that really stand out to me are that could be so useful in student groups as well, this idea of building and strengthening relationships and planning and organizing. That's so much of what's happening when you're in a student group trying to get things done. So I'll talk next about how we might use restorative circle practices in student groups. And I think we need to start with a little bit of framing for this. And this may seem obvious, but in student groups, students are in a relationship with each other. And, you know, I think this is something that was not so central to my thinking about working in a student group or working closely with students in a group when we started out on the project that Spring and I were part of. You know, I was thinking of us as a group that was trying to work together, trying to get things done, trying to produce something, but I wasn't thinking about the relationships that are so central to being able to do those things, or about the ways that those relationships could support us in really critical ways. So recognizing, nurturing, and building these relationships also means that when things get difficult or there's harm done, we're more invested in the work of repair. And we all know that anytime we're working in a group, there are things that happen, conflicts that come up, debates that arise. And so this kind of resilience in the relationships is really important. And we've also thought from our experience that an emphasis on restoration and resilience in these groups is really important in any setting, but maybe especially in public health. You know, we're always working on and talking about ways of supporting and promoting population health. And I think one of our reflections coming out of this was that population health includes our health too. We are part of groups that deserve to be healthy and supported. And the facilitators of our group our restorative circles spoke about a goal in this process of being wholeness. And they use the phrase healthier ever after for, you know, what happens hopefully when we begin to use these processes and have this different orientation. So the circle itself involves a few key practices that we wanted to underscore here. So in a circle process, each person speaks in turn. And, you know, historically, this would be people sitting in a circle and passing around an object. Sometimes it's referred to as a talking stick. So the person who's holding the stick is the person who's speaking, and then they pass it to their left around the circle and left so that you're crossing your heart as you pass it. On Zoom, we do this a little bit differently. We can't pass a real object, but the way that we did this in our circles on Zoom was that the facilitators listed an order of people in the chat, and we just always followed that same order. So the order is random, but it's decided in advance. And another really key piece of this is that everyone who is in the circle participates, including the facilitators, and participates really fully. As our facilitators said really beautifully, I thought, we are all co-laborers and co-recipients, meaning, you know, that we're working together in the circle. We're doing this kind of hard, at times vulnerable work. And we're also all recipients of the insights and the care and the learning that takes place. There are no interruptions. So when someone has the talking stick or is the speaker on Zoom, they speak until they're done and nobody interrupts or comments. And often on Zoom, that's meant that everyone else has stayed muted. And then finally, there's a sense of keeping confidential what's shared in the circle so that people can feel safe. All right, so I will turn it over to Spring now. We're going to try this and I think we're going to pause the recording while we do this.
So I want to say just a couple of disclaimers first. So before we pause the recording, I just want to tell the people that are watching this later that the main reason we wanted to try the circle here was to like feel what it feels like. So when you're watching this, you won't have that experience, but I think the description of that is pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this.
All right, should we turn the recording back on?
We're live.
Great, I'm going to share my screen again. And so now we'll move into talking about some of the exercises that Spring and I and our group used in the restorative circles that we did. And we've organized this in some ways by their function. So the first function that we'll talk about is nurturing connection. And we did a few exercises that seem to really move towards this in the circles that we were part of. The first was a really impactful exercise that we actually sort of serendipitously did in a couple of different ways that I'll talk about more in a moment, but it is working with a poem by George Ella Lyons called Where I'm From. I'm just curious, can people raise hands if they've heard of that poem or worked with it before? I can't really see everyone. Okay. And anyway, I'll talk more about it in a moment. We also, but the goal of that is to really start to get to know other people's backgrounds and to have some evocative sense of the core ideas and values that drive them. And we'll show you a little bit more about what that looks like. We also did something called the 5-finger exercise or 5-finger game, which people may have done as an icebreaker. This is where, you know, everybody holds up 5 fingers and the facilitator, or, you know, it can rotate, lists experiences, usually pretty specific experiences like speaks sign language or, you know, has attended a virtual conference, and each time you have one of those experiences, you put a finger down. And it's a way of kind of showing, I think, not only getting to know one another a little bit in kind of a superficial way, but showing that we all have shared experiences, no matter how different we are. And I think particularly in our group or in groups where there has been some conflict or disagreement, that it can be helpful to connect even around these kind of simple things in this way. And then another question that we all addressed going around the circle was we identified family and family backgrounds as very important to all of us. And so we spoke about one thing we learned from our family and one thing that we want to unlearn from our family. And this really allowed people to think about how I think families are often the first communities that we're part of. And we import our ways of working in community from those experiences into what we're doing at work, at school, et cetera. And so it gives us a chance to think critically about what we want to preserve from that and what we want to maybe work against. Anything to add on this, Spring?
Sorry, no.
Okay.
I was shaking my head. I was like, go ahead.
So I'll tell you a little bit more about the Where I'm From exercise that we did, because this was, I think, just really deeply meaningful to all of us. And I think, so George Ella Lyons is a poet from Kentucky and was the poet laureate of Kentucky in the not so distant past. But a lot of people have engaged with this poem that she wrote, Where I'm From, at one point or another. It's used a lot in writing classes for people of all ages, and ways of kind of connecting with one's background and core values. So I thought we could start by just maybe getting a volunteer to read. I think having a sense of the texture of the poem is really helpful for understanding the exercise. Is there someone who is open to reading the first stanza?
I'll do it.
Thanks.
I am from clothespins, from Clorox and carbon tetrachloride. I am from the dirt under the back porch, black, glistening, it tastes like beets. I am from the forest bush, the Dutch elm, whose long gone limbs I remember as if they were my own.
Beautiful. And is there someone who would be open to reading the second stanza?
I'll do it. I'm from the fudge and eyeglasses, from Imogen and Alafair. I'm from the know-it-alls and the pass-it-ons, from perk up and pipe down. I'm from he restoreth my soul with a cotton ball lamb, and 10 verses I can say myself.
So you can see in this poem that the poet is essentially kind of weaving together a list of items and names and sayings and sensorial experiences that represent her background. And so there are kind of two ways that we did this exercise. One was in the circle, or the ways that the exercise could be done. In the circle, each person can kind of loosely describe where they're from in this style, a style that centers lived experience and kind of listing of these kinds of things. In our group, we did it in more of the writing exercise kind of way, where prior to the circle's beginning, each person completed their own version of this poem and shared it. And there are actually some really wonderful, simple ways that you can do this. I added on the next slide, Spring found this kind of poem generator online. So it essentially functions like a Mad Libs. So you write in, you can see, I am from a specific item from your childhood home, from 2 products or objects from your past. I am from a phrase describing your childhood home. And it's kind of an amazing experience to do this and to share it with people and to kind of feel all that it conveys about who you are. I don't know that we're going to have time to actually engage with this as an exercise, but we can certainly share the link to that poem generator if people want to play around with it after the session. So I'll go through just 2 more sets of exercises that we worked with in our groups. So we definitely did exercises that were focused on nurturing trust. And one of the ways that we did this that I think worked really well was that at the end of our first restorative circle, the facilitators asked us to choose what they called a heart tool to bring to the next session. And so these were things like empathy, open-mindedness, trust, and humor. And then when we came back for a second circle, they asked us to remind ourselves of what the heart tool we had chosen. And part of the way through that session, they checked in with us to say, think about how well we're each using this tool. And these were really, it was a way of just very consciously trying to be open-hearted in the group and to give people the benefit of the doubt and to use these tools to help make it a safe and open space. I also recall that at the end of one session, there was just a kind of brief exercise to breathe in everything that was good about what had just happened in the circle and to breathe out everything that felt bad or toxic or not good about it. And to me, this just really underscored the idea that we can be in relationship with one another and continue to work together even and recognize that there are things that are supportive and good that are happening and things that are not supportive and bad that are happening, but we can remain in relationship through that. And if people want to post in the chat as we're going through these exercises, any other exercises you've done that have the potential to help nurture trust or help nurture connection, it would be great to share those and hear about other ways that this can happen. So the last set of exercises I will mention were ones that were kind of focused on supporting healthy processes. And I think the most overt way of doing this is really going through an intentional process of creating group norms and deciding what ideal ways of working together are. And a very powerful way of doing this, which we have heard about and talked about a little bit in our group, is the idea of checking in periodically on these norms. So this kind of thing happens, I think, frequently in groups that work together. And even in maybe in some of our courses, I know in the CHAS collaborative courses, you're kind of required to set out some group norms at the beginning of the project. And I think it's what we have learned is that it's one thing to do that, and it's a different thing to check in periodically about how those norms are working, what difficulties people are coming up against in keeping those norms, how the norms may need to change over time. And so really kind of living the norms and thinking about them critically and engaging with them throughout the process can be really useful. An exercise that we did in Circle related to supporting healthy processes was, and I think, this was largely because we had some difficulties in our group. Just looking at the third bullet here, we each person spoke about one thing that we wanted to keep about our process so far and one thing that we wanted to give away. And so this gave us an opportunity to recognize that there were things that were working well, and that there were other things that we needed to move on from. And, I think that could be used really usefully even in a situation where there haven't been issues in the group, where we could talk about something we want to keep about our past experiences with group work and things that we want to give away from those past experiences. Yes, Joanna.
So is this something that was used at the beginning, at the middle, at the end, or?
So we use this, we were midway through our project when oh, you mean the group norms or these circle questions?
Sorry, I meant specifically, yeah, the last one, the keeping
last
and giving
one.
away.
Yeah, I mean, we did that midway through our project after we had already had some issues, but I think doing it at the beginning would be a great practice to kind of learn from past group work experiences. I'm looking at the time and I'm going to try to move kind of quickly through just the last slide where we're sharing, and then if we have time, we'll do a couple more questions. So we were trying to think about what this might actually look like. Like, how could students introduce this in the context of group work? So how do you all move out into the world to do this, to try to initiate a circle process to create, say, connection and trust? So we imagine that someone in the group, one of you perhaps, could introduce, this idea of the importance of developing strong and resilient relationships among members to get the most out of the course and the time together, and to really support one another, since we know we all need more support these days and really at all times. And you could share the kinds of basic restorative circle practices that we've talked about today. You could consider as a group which exercises might be most meaningful or useful, given the nature of the group, conduct a circle to try out one or two exercises, and then maybe consider doing circles periodically throughout the semester. And, I think our take, as I've gestured at before this point, we had 2 facilitators in the groups that we participated in. And I think having facilitators can be especially helpful when you're doing groups that are meant to be repairing some harm. But I think a lot of these practices can very much be done without facilitators, formally trained facilitators, and can be potentially very useful. Spring, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, so we did bring in facilitators for these processes, and we had 3 circles that we did with our group. And then what we've done is, after having those 3 formal circles, we have incorporated some of these ideas into each meeting. So we talked about how do we want to keep the spirit of this alive as we continue throughout the rest of the semester in our work together. So I think, you can think creatively about what aspects of these circles feel like they would be helpful for you, and then bring that up to a group that you're working with and see, how people might want to try to incorporate some of these things.
So I think we'll just close out by thanking all of you for coming. We want to thank the student group that we worked with to do all of this the first time. Everyone engaged with real courage and vulnerability. And we wanted to thank our facilitators who taught us so much about these processes and their value. I will stop the share. Sherry, are we allowed to take a few questions at the end?
Oh, absolutely. And I want to thank you, Emma, and also you, Spring. And thank you so much to the participants today. You've participated in a really fully full and thoughtful way that made the difference in terms of how this session went. And I feel like I learned a lot just from doing it. So I really appreciate you all. But yeah, for sure, take questions.
Great. Anyone? I know we're at the time, so if people have to go, that's absolutely fine, but.
I do have a question. I feel like these are very practical ways that like students can incorporate them. But I'm also wondering if there's like any conversation like within Chaz specifically about how like professors can maybe like encourage these practices, and like even the idea of like having one meeting in groups that's not about the project and just about getting to know each other, and kind of like maybe taking the responsibility off students a little bit to create these processes. Yeah.
I think that's a really great observation and was definitely something that we were thinking about as we put the slides together. Spring and I did present on this at, there's a group of faculty and doctoral students that meets every other week as an anti-racist teaching collaborative. So we presented on all of this there, but I think doing more to try to structure it into the way faculty think about the design of group work is really important.
Yeah, I think I really like you putting some of that onus back on faculty because we're like, here, use this. And I think you're completely right, though, that, you know, a lot of times faculty say like, oh, here's your group project, go do it, good luck. And yeah, it would be lovely for us to think more critically about how we can support that process.
Well, thanks for bringing it up to that collective. And I do see like a lot of these processes, like I said, as like approachable for students to incorporate. So I appreciate that.
Anybody else have any other questions or comments before we close?
I can think of something. I have seen where in a course, when we do the group work, part of the assignment is to assign group roles. So kind of what Jess was alluding to, there should be at least one meeting where we actually just get to know each other, create a rapport, assign group roles. But then there's other courses where it is just, here's the project, here's your random group members, randomly assigned group members, and go from there. So maybe a kind of a more standard way of, or in one of the earlier courses of setting up that framework that is just sort of understood as you go through the core courses, you know, and maybe it's in the intro, one of like, it's 6. I know in 610, we very specifically had group roles. That said, you know, we had group convener, but there was no group leader, right? So it can become very difficult when it comes down to, we're trying to make a decision about content, and we can say, yes, majority rules. But again, when there's so many people coming in and putting into pieces of the pie to try to make it flow together, that becomes, I think, and the editing and pulling everything together becomes so time consuming that it does distract from it creates more tension in the relationships in the group. It also, for me, I find it is very distracting from the learning, because I know that if we do divvy up all the work into parts, we are still responsible for all of the content, not just to hyperanalyze our part and you hyperanalyze your part, etc. And then again, somehow we all put it together to submit this final project, or at least pieces of the project. And I think and I don't believe that efficiency is the number one priority, but it does make it harder in terms of when we're all we have a lot of time constraints. We all have family obligations. Most of us, I've found, are working professionals, or they're doing the program full time. And I mean, I'm in a group right now, someone's in 4 different groups, and they are just literally, for us to even meet, they're like, well, I got another group meeting. And they, you know, it's the taking into consideration that, especially, you know, in the graduate level, as you were saying, that we have the most group intensive projects or work in our courses, I guess. And I really like what Jess said about how can we incorporate more of this, how the instructors can design the project so a lot of the stuff is incorporated up front, and even incorporating, you know, best way to set up using Google Docs. We find a lot of students come in, they've never used a shared doc before. There's students who come in who've never used Blackboard. And so we as group members spend a lot of time trying to get everybody on the same page and create these relationships and roles and group norms before we actually even get to the content and start working. And I just want to point out, again, I'm kind of going all around the houses here on this one, but if there is a way to get, like, even if we all say we're in an online asynchronous course, could we all meet once at the beginning of the semester for those of us who are local, meet our groups in person, ask all the questions of the professor, go through, these are the, this is the group project, this is what's expected, so that we've made sure everybody's starting out on a little bit more even playing field. Because I've, been in groups too, where we get halfway through and there's some people who haven't looked at the project yet. So again, if there's just a way starting out on the ground floor at the beginning of the semester, we could be a little bit more on the same page and have a little more structure and the stuff built into the projects, that would be really ideal. So yeah, I have a lot to say on this. I apologize for taking up so much time, but yeah.
Thank you.
Just if you even know where to take a stab at that, that would be great. Thank you.
I mean, I think it's excellent feedback for us as faculty to keep trying to move this forward, that just sort of the recognition that there could be more support of a variety of kinds to student groups to help ensure that they function in ways that are beneficial to learning and beneficial to the individuals within the group. And I think, the restorative practices are part of that. Restorative circle practices are part of that, but you pointed out a lot of other great approaches as well. So Spring and I will certainly do our best to carry that forward. This is something that we both feel really strongly about, and we'll do our best. But thank you all for your insights and your participation. And I know we've kept everyone a little bit past the time, and we just hope that everybody has a good rest of the day and a restful weekend if possible. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is really great. Thank you. Have a great weekend,
Thank
everyone.
you so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time and consideration on this.
Take care. Bye.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.